Hello, valued listeners, and welcome to episode number 4 of the Into the North podcast. I am Sick Robot, filling in for Noobzaurs, who unfortunately can't be here today, joined by my co-hosts.
Null here.
And Spleenface, how's it going?
We have a pretty great podcast today lined up, if I do say so myself. Probably going to enjoy listening to it. I can guarantee that pretty well. Today we're going to cover a big one. We're going to go over control in EDH. Wow, bit of a loaded topic there. So we'll see how that works out. And then we're also going to cover competitive gameplay in general. You know, the cEDH social contract, the mindset of going into it. You know, rules, all that kind of good stuff. And then we'll, as always, cover listener questions at the end. On to housekeeping. So we are probably going to be at GP Niagara. I know myself and Spleen are definitely going to try to make the attempt to get out there.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to try to make it.
Cool. So if you guys are looking for some awesome cEDH games, meeting up with us in real life, hanging out, I would highly suggest trying to make it out there. It's going to be a great time. I feel it in my bones.
And it sounds like a decent amount of other cEDH players from various surrounding areas are trying to make it. So hopefully there'll be a pretty good crowd.
Yeah, it's a pretty central area, and I know a lot of people that I know from the cEDH community are trying to make it out. So I feel like it's going to be pretty great. As always, special thanks to our long-suffering editor, Calvin, Hisp, and NS Lover for our theme song and our logo, as always. And I guess just if we want to quickly go over experiences at GP Toronto.
So I only played one day, but I did on-demand pods all day, including both of like the double, whatever they were called, like the Mega Commander ones. And honestly, like, I played with very few actual competitive players. The two like double Commander events, only one of them I actually busted out my competitive Commander deck.
I played a lot more Commander. I was there all 3 days.
Yeah, you did. Oh my god.
Because I bought a Fnatic package.
Spleen.
And so
Spleen is a
I was
pod
grinding.
grinder.
Oh yeah. 15 pods is what I wound up playing. I encountered a few more competitive decks. I also encountered some, not necessarily competitive decks that are definitely scary. I won some games, I lost some games, but generally people from all across the power level spectrum were just great to play with. Only had 1 or 2 people who, anything went wrong, and some people were totally fine even though they were outclassed, and just generally had a great time.
Yeah, I had some pretty great experiences that sort of matched up with that. Just, playing with people, like, definitely, like, getting casual pods in after, grinding ticks, but, like, a bunch of great people around. It was awesome. So I think that's about all we got for housekeeping. If we want to go over new developments right now, I know there's one big one out there, which is the new London Mulligan change that is potentially happening, is going to be tested out for Modern. You guys got thoughts on it?
I mean, it's London, Ontario, right? We can't have it
Obviously,
not be
yes.
a Canadian city anymore.
Yeah. It's the London, Ontario Mulligan now.
So, I think that, I've seen the math that says that combo decks are very much benefit from this in Modern. I think in EDH, because we currently have a free mulligan, the advantage will be less, assuming we don't keep the free mulligan, which, please no. If we keep the free mulligan and implement this rule, that would be awful.
What are you talking about? I love just hitting my combo 100% of the time, all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a little ridiculous.
So I think that in cEDH, I think that like land screw is less of an issue, and that's kind of what it's designed to alleviate. So I don't know that the benefits, I think both the benefits and the costs in EDH are lower. But I tend to think that the costs outweigh the benefits, even so.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if this ever gets implemented. By the way, I don't think we actually specifically went over the new Mulligan rules. Let me do that real quick. So it's changing. So the London Mulligan rules are changing from the Vancouver Mulligan rules, where, currently we get Mulligan, free Mulligan, and then every time you Mulligan, you take one less card, then you get a scry if you go to less than 7. The new proposed Mulligan rules, the ones that are going to be tested out for Modern and might potentially make it over to EDH at some point, is basically to go 7, 7, 7, 7, and 7s all the way down. But once you keep a hand, you have to put a number of cards from your hand equal to your Mulligan on the bottom of your library. So, yep.
The one other thing I wanted to say about this Mulligan is I don't understand why you don't shuffle the cards back in.
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
In any order.
I feel like it's so weird just to, like, give people inherent knowledge of their library from the beginning of the game. Like, I get that Scry is sort of like that, but, like, this is just, like, a whole nother level.
Grenzo's so good, oh my gosh.
So good. Just put all your combo pieces on the bottom. You just mull until you get your Doomsday pile and you're good to go.
My one concern with the new Mulligan is that the stronger like your starting hand gets, the more the game will become just a rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, I feel that. I also I sort of have a problem with it in our format specifically, and it's going to sound blasphemous because, as we all know, I'm a disgusting Hulk player. But I think there's a real cost implementing this, especially for cEDH, because already Hulk is a very good deck. I think a lot of people would agree with that. And
it's okay.
I think one of the biggest problems with Hulk right now, and I think you can't really get away from this, is that it mulligans not that well, because you always have the chance of just redrawing a combo piece into a really good hand. So, like, you're playing Breakfast, and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to mulligan down to 6 because I didn't really like the composition of that hand. Like, it was fine, but it didn't really have enough gas or whatever. And you mulligan down to whatever, and then you have a hand where you have Flash, Hulk, couple of lands, and then you also happen to have, like, an Angel and a Dread Return in it, and you just sort of get screwed. I think the big problem with the new mulligan is those hands on low mulligans don't really exist anymore, because you just get to put your Hulk pieces on the furthest away from your hand as possible.
Yeah, I think that...
Assuming you're not shuffling your deck, but that deck certainly runs the full set of fetches and certainly runs conflict leaders.
The whole thing with that, though, is, like, it's not even necessarily, like, shuffling isn't even really a problem either, but, like, also just the fact that you know they're on the bottom of your library, and you can just, like, sort of avoid shuffling if you need to, just because you have that information.
Yeah, or, you play your non-fetch lands first, and then it's like, okay, we'll shuffle once, I have one draw, and then hope, maybe I get really unlucky, but minimize. Yeah, I think that cEDH in particular, compared to, like, pretty much any other format, is the one where it's most likely to be relevant that cards need to be in your deck.
Yes.
Yeah.
A cool side effect of this, actually, just switching to another format really quick for a second, is I read an article on Vintage recently. I think it was published the day that we're recording this, actually, about how the mulligan changes might affect Vintage Dredge. And somebody came up with basically just running through probabilities on if you play 4 Serum Powder with the new mulligan change, you can mulligan to Bizarre Baghdad with, I think it's a 99.05% hit rate on opening hands.
Oh my god, stop.
So it just sort of gives you an idea of how much the London Mulligan sort of favors unfair decks, or decks that are specifically looking for 1 card or 2 cards.
Yeah, well, thankfully EDH has 100 cards, and there aren't just 1 card engines like... Well, Bizarre isn't quite as effective as it is in Vintage Dredge.
Yes, fortunately enough, because I can't imagine people having to buy Bazaars along with their Time Twisters.
Also, yeah, you don't get 4 Bazaars.
Yeah. It's like can you imagine Get Wrong with 4 Bazaar? God.
Will they even be that good?
I mean, probably, yeah.
That's a separate episode.
You'd probably play 3. You'd probably play 2 or 3, right? I'd say.
You certainly wouldn't play 1 if you could play more than 1.
Getting sidetracked. We have to get through new developments at some point. Also, new development, Opus Thief. Pretty cool new deck by the man himself, Shaper. It's pretty great. Sort of relates to our first topic too in a bit. But what do you guys think about Opus Thief? I think it's a pretty neat deck.
I think it's super cool. I'm really hyped about. I was really hyped about Smothering Tithe, and I'm really happy to see it in a deck. Especially one that's a control deck, because I just love control so much. Yeah, I'm definitely planning on saving this up and trying it out.
Yeah, definitely. I like the fact that it's sort of taking advantage of a whole bunch of pieces that, like, if you list them all off together, you're like, wow, that sounds really good together. You know, it's like Smothering Tithe, Notion Thief, Alms Collector, and then all the good wheels. But then there are also pieces that if you just list them, like if you just say one of them, you're like, oh yeah, that's a solid card, I'd run that. And so you're not like, it's like putting a bunch of good cards together, but all of them, and then they synergize really well, and they're still good they're still good on their own, rather than sort of relying on combos or synergy.
Isn't that the route to a good brew? Is you just take pre-existing good cards and put them into new configurations?
I mean, yeah, isn't that what good stuff is?
Exactly. But yeah, I'm actually I'm pretty excited about seeing people try out Opus Thief, because I think it's a neat alternative to, just like standard Crom Timna style stuff, or like, just like generic PST stuff. It's sort of neat.
I'm just gonna throw this out quickly. What are your thoughts on building an Opus Thief style deck in Sans Red?
I feel like that's so rough. By the way, note, I have built this deck before. It eventually turned into E-Man because Bio took the shell out of it and turned it into E-Man. I think that you're missing just like Wheel though, which is a big deal. Like, just not having Wheel of Fortune is really rough in a deck that really wants to abuse its wheels.
Yeah, I think Winds of Change is just so easy to combo with.
I guess Winds of Change is a 1-mana wheel effect.
Yeah,
which is pretty nuts.
That easily works into like Yawgmoth's Will type turn.
Winds of Change with like any of the draw stealers or wheel like synergy cards is just insane. But yeah, thankfully Noobz isn't here to shit on Smothering Tithe going into
Smothering Tithe is a garbage card played by garbage people.
The direct quote from Noobz, by the way, definitely not paraphrasing in any way.
That's in an episode. We have a recording.
I'm sure he will own up to the fact that he called Smothering Tithe absolute garbage. Why would anybody play this card? If you play this card, you're a bad player.
And a bad person.
Yeah.
I remember he said that.
Yeah. It's just, he really went at it for like a good 15 minutes. I don't know. I thought it was a bit over the top, but makes for good entertainment.
I guess, okay, one last note for me that I guess that isn't particularly obvious, but Crom is definitely a real card, especially in a deck like this.
Oh yeah, I feel like Crom is a bit underrated. Maybe not underrated, but I think people see that he's not Thrasios and is not a combo outlet and sort of discount him a bit, where he does have real merits. Like, you ever see a Crom come down like game when people are at like 20 life and are still like holding on to cards, where he just starts slapping people and drawing you cards every turn? It's pretty great.
It also, I feel like people are less likely to play around his draw effect because it's limited to 1 per turn per person.
Yeah, it's
right. Like, when it's like, if we don't play around this, that person's going to draw 1,000,000 cards with something like Fish. It's like people play around it. But when it's like, if we don't play around this, he's going to draw 4 cards.
Well, I think people
It's
kind of like
it's much
they have
less.
I seem to find that people play into the unavoidable draw effects more than they do the like quote unquote avoidable ones.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know what you're talking about. I always pay 4 for my Remora.
Every time.
Every time. Can't let people draw extra
Never
cards.
once. I'd
I
rather
definitely
concede.
do pay 4 for stuff sometimes.
Like, sometimes, yeah. I can't imagine ever having to always pay 4 for Remora. It'd be a disgusting card. So I think we're actually gonna hop into a new section on the podcast here. Bit tentative. Testing out a bit. You know, putting a toe in the water. But we'll see. Spleen, you wanna go over this?
Sure, so this one's going to be a learning experience, both for us and for you. So what we're going to do is each episode we're going to highlight just one either interaction or rule that we think is interesting or powerful and not obvious, or maybe a little bit tricky to understand, just so people can understand what their decks are capable of, what their decks can do against their opponents, and just maybe pull out some surprise tricks at some point in the game. So what we've decided to talk about today is how to take advantage of replacement effects. Most specifically, what happens when there are multiple replacement effects acting on the same event. Does somebody want to start us off?
Sure. So, what happens when there are 2 Notion Thieves on the board, and I try to draw a card? Well, it actually is sort of weird and sort of neat. The official rules actually state that whenever somebody is having their effect replaced or their action replaced by any replacement effect, either theirs or another player's replacement effects, the player that is controlling the action, say my draw, so I get to control whatever that action is, they actually get to decide what order replacement effects are applied in, which is pretty neat, because what that means is if there are 2 players with Notion Thieves out, the person who's drawing the card actually decides which Notion Thief player gets to draw a card.
Yeah.
Which is...
Yeah, so, sorry, there's a couple other key things here. The first is that once you modify an effect with a replacement effect, once you modify an event with a replacement effect, it can still be modified further by other replacement effects that still apply to the event as it appears then. And each replacement effect can only apply to the same event once. That one's key.
Yes.
Because otherwise 2 Notion Thieves would create an infinite bounce back and forth loop.
Tie the game! But yeah, it also means that, like, in a more practical sense, rather than just, 2 people having Notion Thieves out, when you're doing stuff like playing replacement effects against something like Gitrog, where they're always going to be doing dredging stuff and weird stuff like that, they actually get to decide if they get to apply dredge first, or if, say, another draw replacement happens first, which is actually pretty neat.
Which is how they are allowed to use, like in that deck, Chains of Mephistopheles essentially forms a discard outlet, taking advantage of rules like this, where sometimes you choose to replace your draw with a dredge, sometimes you replace it with the discard and draw from Chains, and then you discard Dakmor Salvage and net the draw trigger, and so there's just a lot of really sort of interesting ways that these rules interact. And so it's just something to be mindful of and look for, opportunities to maximize. For example, a situation that happened was I had a Zer's weirding out, and somebody had a Notion Thief, and it was essentially I could choose whether or not I was paying life to let them draw or not, or they had to pay the life. So just understanding how that works lets you take the best advantage of every situation.
Yeah, with all these new Opus Thief decks running around, we'll see a ton of this, I bet.
Yeah, that's it.
Gotta get your Alms Collector Notion Thief stuff right. That's actually a weird one, too. If there was an Alms Collector and a Notion Thief out on the board at the same time, the person who's drawing the card, if they're drawing multiple at once, can actually decide exactly how many cards they want somebody to draw. Say there's a Notion Thief and an Alms Collector on the board, and a wheel effect happens. Because for each draw in that draw sequence, in that simultaneously draw sequence, they get to decide whether the Alms Collector or the Notion Thief applies first. They can actually decide, I want you to draw exactly 3 cards, because I'm going to replace 2 of your draws with Notion Thief applies first, and then you get a draw, and the rest of them are all going to go under Alms Collector, and he's just going to give you 1. So pretty neat. Yeah, just something to be aware of, and hope you guys learned something from that. Let us know how much you like this, how much this is interesting to you, because it's definitely something we're looking into. All right. I think it's about time to get on to our first topic. First real topic, anyway. Something like that. We are going to be covering Control in cEDH, which is a pretty neat topic, because I think there's a lot of people that come into cEDH from other formats, specifically 1v1 formats, that are big Control players at heart, and they want to figure out what kind of role Control has in the format, and what they can play that sort of emulates a Control deck.
Yeah, and I think another thing is, even though some other archetypes maybe don't translate well, like aggro, it's a lot harder to understand for someone why Control doesn't translate. With aggro, you just say you have to deal 6 times as much damage, and they go, oh yeah, that doesn't sound good. But with Control, it may not be as obvious why it doesn't work the same way.
Yeah, so I guess that starts off our first topic. Which is why classic Control theory doesn't work. So I believe classic Control theory doesn't work because all other archetypes can draw just as many cards because everyone else is playing Tymna.
And everybody else just gets insane draw engines in the command zone, and you don't get to do anything. I think that actually does have a kernel of truth to it, though, where there are so many more mid-range elements that are present in even hardcore combo decks in cEDH, just because you have to fill 100 cards, that it's really hard to play Control in the way that a lot of 1v1 decks do, in like, hey, I know that at least 50% of the field isn't going to be playing draw cards, like, I'm going to be playing against stuff that's not actively trying to outvalue me, so I can sort of afford to play some card negative stuff to deal with that. Whereas in EDH, a lot of the time, it's like, yeah, everybody has their Mystic Remoras, everybody's going to be playing their Sylvan Libraries if they can, they're going to be doing all this stuff. And it's really hard to just out-card advantage people.
Well, I think also there is kind of an interesting parallel with aggro, where aggro's bad because aggro cards are balanced for one opponent with 20 life. Card draw spells, just sort of one-shot card draw effects, have to be balanced, assuming you're only trying to outvalue one person, not 3. So, you know, a card like Harmonize or Concentrate, like 4 mana, draw 3 cards, is fine when you're playing against one person. But then when you play against 3 people, like, spending the time to draw essentially 1 card for each opponent, that's like your turn 3. And so, you know, the odds that you lose because you cast a card like that are so much higher, and it really doesn't get you as far. Which is why the best draw effects that we see in cEDH are ones that actually scale with your opponents. You know, you draw from your opponents doing stuff, like Mystic Remora, or Runic Armasaur, or, you know, to a lesser extent, Rhystic Study, but cards like that.
Yeah, that's also a big one of why Control doesn't translate as well, is that card economy sort of gets screwed over by having 3 opponents instead of 1, where every card of yours has to be worth basically 3 cards, or else you're just getting generally outvalued, because if you're spending 1 card on one thing for 1 opponent, then you're basically just 1 for 3 yourself, right? Because you've only put that opponent down one card. Both other opponents are pretty much completely unaffected. So you have to find. You can't really play like single removal spells as a way to like effectively deal with people to like keep their threats out of the way or whatever. So you have to find these ways to affect all of your opponents in significant ways rather than just playing targeted stuff a lot of the time.
So I guess that kind of leads us into like, how would you define control at EDH? I guess we can all just take turns.
This is a big one. Well, yeah. I think I would say control in EDH is basically in that area of I am probably not winning the game early. I am accepting that, and I'm actively using blue counterspells and other things that aren't proactive stacks pieces to slow the game down to my level.
I think another hallmark of control decks in cEDH, as opposed to mid-range or more tempo-y ones that have control-y aspects but are still combo decks at heart, is whether or not you actively tutor for an engine, like a value engine or a value piece over a combo piece in the early turns.
I think one thing that's also
like if you go, oh, I have a tutor, I think I'm going to use it to find, maybe it's compost because you're in a pod with a lot of black or something like that, as opposed to I'm going to, find Isochron Scepter. Like, I think that is something that only control decks do regularly.
Yeah, and I guess I kind of want to like take that to a bit more of an abstract level and essentially say that the deck is trying to establish presence through advantage of almost all kinds, not just card advantage. So that could even be like that's not necessarily just taking advantage of the stack with counterspells. That's also taking advantage of mana by playing things like Smothering Tithe. That's taking advantage of turns by playing things like Seaborn Muse.
So generating both a mana and a card advantage.
Yeah, and these types of advantages, kind of like as they present themselves. So, I think right now mana and cards are definitely the best in the format, but who knows in the future what kind of card we'll see. Najeela is almost kind of a case where you can take advantage of the board because it's just a one card creature damage engine.
So here's a question: if we're sort of like defining control as this deck that is disruptive and uses all these value engines to keep their card advantage up and actually be able to sort of pseudo trade one for one, how would you separate a control deck in cEDH from a mid-range deck in cEDH? Because in 1v1 formats a lot of the time, the difference would be that mid-range decks only are recurring value and aren't necessarily looking to lock a game up, and they're more doing, I'm going to generate a lot of value, completely outvalue you, go over the aggro deck, and just get there. Whereas control decks are more playing card draw and card advantage as ways to supplement their disruption packages.
Well, so I think that mid-range in cEDH is kind of... I think that a lot of things change. Mid-range almost has... It gets brought closer together with the idea of tempo in other formats, where mid-range decks, they're not looking to combo super quickly, they're looking to be just disruptive enough that they can pull out maybe a slightly more resilient combo that's a little bit slower. And I think so that's sort of what separates fast combo from mid-range, is whether or not you are trying to be disruptive first and then combo. And I think what separates mid-range from control is whether you're trying to be just disruptive and then combo, or you're trying to sort of stabilize and gain control of the entire game and then combo. Like, I think that control decks, when they try and combo, almost never get stopped because they look to combo in a game state where they have such an advantage that it's very unlikely, rather than mid-range decks, which sometimes do because they're trying to combo more opportunistically and with a less locked-up game state.
And I think that winning in such a fashion gets easier the more you understand your opponent's decks and consider, at this stage in the game, what cards do they have in their hand, how good is their board presence, how many, which removal spells have I already seen, what's left in the deck. That'll allow you to combo sooner.
So you'd say mid-range decks are more combo decks that happen to also be playing some disruption and a bunch of card advantage engines, whereas control is a base disruptive deck that also happens to be playing some win cons and is playing card advantage engines to keep up with the interaction.
Yeah, I think that mid-range decks sacrifice a bit of speed for a little bit more resiliency and a little bit more disruption. And I think that control decks sacrifice speed, a lot more speed, but also to an extent consistency to maximize disruptiveness and resiliency. And when I say consistency, I don't mean, sometimes you can't win, but I mean if you cast a demonic tutor to find a card draw engine, you are being less consistent than if you cast it to find a combo piece. Like, you're saying, you know what, this is going to push back my win I don't know how many turns, but which is inherently inconsistent, but it will make me much less likely to lose in the meantime.
Yeah, so you're necessarily just you're just looking at surviving into the later game and not necessarily looking at winning soon or anything like that.
I think
so. Can I throw a wrench into this?
Yeah. I was just gonna say that I think survive is kind of not necessary. Doesn't necessarily represent exactly the idea. Just because I feel like survival is kind of crawling, just barely making it. Where with control, it's I guess a bit more than that.
Well, it's more like you're surviving the early game because you have your eyes set on the late game and you just want to have absolute control over the game late to be able to win. So let me throw a wrench in this real quick in this clean, tidy definition of what control is in EDH. when we look at consult now, how do we start classifying that? Because I think a lot of people would classify console as control, but console doesn't necessarily have big value engines, and it's not necessarily looking to go late. So it can't really be mid-range because of the lack of value engines. But it's not really fast combo either.
Well, I don't think mid-range decks necessarily have value engines. I think that in cEDH, I think that mid-range and tempo sort of got rolled into one, and the decks that people classify as mid-range kind of translate more to decks that would be classified as tempo, like Twin in Modern, for example, where you weren't just trying to find your combo pieces. You were playing a disruptive game, and then it was like, okay, I've disrupted you a bunch, and now I'm going to try and win. I'm always threatening to win, but starting turn 4 with Twin, but I'm always threatening to win, but my primary plan is just to mess you up first. I think that that's sort of where mid-range decks fall. They pack a little bit more interaction, a little bit more stacks than the fast combo decks, but they're not looking to generate value in a long-term way. And I think that the reason console decks fall into the more mid-rangey, tempo-y type of deck is because they aren't looking to generate value. They're looking to slow down and stop everyone else and then win. rather than lock up the board and then win. Like, lock up the game, I have 5 counter spells in hand and I'm drawing 10 cards a turn. It's like, okay, you've all tried to win and I've stopped you and now I'm going to win.
Yeah, no, like, I think I would probably agree with that. Now, actually, no. Do you have anything to say on this?
I think it's hard to speak for console decks generally, because I think they do fall into like the tight win condition package, which is an attribute of a control deck.
And they do tend to interact a whole bunch.
Yes.
Wait, sorry. I've thought of a more succinct way of putting what I was trying to say earlier, which is mid-range or tempo decks like Consultation seek to answer their opponent's win conditions before winning. Control decks seek to answer their opponent's everything before winning.
Okay, so you would not consider Consult a control deck?
No, I wouldn't.
I see. So you would say that like you're a control purist. You have to be playing Baral. You got to be playing Rashmi. You got to be playing maybe even 4-color Rashmi isn't control enough for you.
Dude, control purists are only welcome in the control topic.
No, so I would say decks for me that fall into control would be, obviously stuff like Rashmi and Baral is clearly control. Slow Tassiger builds, like more Seasons Past rather than like Ad Nauseam or Flash Hulk. Potentially something like E or He-Man, potentially even Opus Thief. Could classify as a control deck. Although I've seen very different takes on Opus Thief. Like, I've seen some lists that have a lot of that package, but for example don't run Ad Nauseam. Which I would be much more inclined to classify as a control deck than the ones with Ad Nauseam.
But man, in your opinion, is closer on the control side of the spectrum than the mid-range side of the spectrum.
Yes, maybe Man wasn't the greatest example. I have to admit, I'm not actually super familiar. I'm not super familiar with Man. I've seen it a few times, but not enough to really get a feel. It's possible I was playing against very conservative pilots.
That is fair.
So maybe I'll retract my statement about Man because I don't know enough about the deck to make that definitive.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think it's sort of true though, and I think that it's sort of it can be a bit hard to actually classify specific decks as control or mid range, and I think just because of actually a point that you made right there is that I think like control and mid range can actually sort of like be a bit ambiguous depending on who's piloting the deck. Like a mid range deck could like sort of be a control deck if somebody very conservative is piloting it, and somebody who like naturally wants to tutor for answers more than combo pieces.
Okay, here's an interesting question for the two of you. Do you consider CVT a control deck?
Woo!
Yeah.
You do? Well, no, being the Teferi expert on the panel currently, why would you consider Teferi a control deck?
Your constant ability to threaten a win is your greatest tool and your greatest form of interaction.
But couldn't that just be a mid-range combo deck? Because you have a bunch of the hallmarks of a mid-range combo deck over a control deck, right? Like you're looking to threaten a win. You're playing enough interaction to get by the early game and answering people's wins and then capitalizing on that. So, what puts it into control for you?
All right. Okay. So I think possibly in the current metagame, it would be hard to classify Teferi's control strictly because of Tymna, but like the deck, I know, man, I know, because I believe that before, like, other decks were capable of, generating as much card advantage as like Teferi can, then let me start over there. I think the reason why you can't necessarily classify Teferi as control these days is because it fails to generate as much card advantage as other non-control decks. But the deck, in terms of deck construction, it is counterspells, a very tight combo package. It's kind of mid on, like, I guess, the land / mana producing count. Yeah.
It's fair. I could definitely see that. I think Teferi is sort of weird in that way, where, like, I think, like, as you play in slower meta games, Teferi actually shifts more in the scale towards control. Like, just because of the way that you would play him in slower pods versus, like, when you play in faster pods, like Teferi, I think gets closer toward, like, the adaptive / oh god, did I just say adaptive unironically? Christ. The mid-range combo end of the scale, where, like, it's a lot easier to just, like, answer one win con early and then stick a chainmail.
I think it also speaks for, like, the tools in mono blue. I think mono blue has a hard time being pure mid-range deck.
Yeah, I think, like, lower colored blue decks usually just get shoehorned into some amount of control anyway, just because that's all you could really play.
Yeah. Alright, Spleen. Final words?
What do I think? I'm not inclined, at least in the current meta, to classify Teferi as a control deck. I think it just lacks the long game potential that it would need for me to put it in that category. A lot because of Tymna.
Yeah.
The 100% grip on the game that's needed to actually be a control deck.
Also, speaking of, could you put some Tymna blockers in your Teferi deck?
I have put Tymna blockers in my Teferi deck.
He doesn't need to do
I
that.
have put them in my deck.
That's true. That is true.
I've put in
Silent Arbiter? What's that?
Well,
no.
Not just Silent Arbiter. I can keep that a secret, though.
Just everything.
Oh,
Vidalcan shackles. That's a good one.
No shackles. No shackles.
So let's talk. Let's talk about where control might go in the future, because I think we just sort of covered a lot of the reasons why control is a bit iffy right now. Is that, like, sort of extended from Teferi into the other low color control decks? Is that, like, a lot of the time you can have sort of a rough time actually getting a grip on the game early, and then, like, actually, locking people out. A lot of the time because Tymna is good, but also just because a lot of decks are playing more value engines now. So, where do you guys think that control might go in the future to combat those issues?
I think that control I think it's an archetype that actually just suffers as more and more cards are released, because they'll release cards that let you play through control-y stuff in certain ways, and increase the options there, but they will not meaningfully increase the options of control cards. Like, we're never going to see better counterspells than we already have. We're never going to see better removal than a card like Swords to Plowshares. I guess Assassin's Trophy was the closest we've come to that, but that's a card that just goes in every deck anyways, so it's not a particular boon to control.
And how?
Yeah, given how many colors a deck can be in cEDH, every deck can kind of can include the core control package at pretty much no cost. And yeah, if they're not printing new control cards, then that core set is pretty fixed.
That's definitely fair. I feel like I might have a bit of a different opinion on this, just because
Oh, the optimist.
Oh, I think Control generally does get worse as we see more combo cards printed, and just like earlier and earlier wins make Control harder to play. But I think there is a future in Control, and I think it's because of two things really. One is that they're always going to print more value engines and more efficient value engines that work multiplayer, which means that we're pretty much always going to be gaining more ways to keep up in cards with everybody else. Like look at Verity's Circle that just got printed, right? Or like Runic Armosaur, which is also pretty recent. And then people also start finding old stuff to play too, like Compost, a lot of good stuff. But I also think,
oh yeah, Sheldon found Compost for all his cEDH.
Yeah,
didn't you hear?
God. But I also think that there do need to be some changes made to the way the Control is played and built. I think that as of right now, I think people try to jam too much general Control, where I think a real route to success with a Control deck in the future could be just actually playing a lot more to your meta. I mean, I'm taking this from playing and having built something like 4-color Rashmi, where you are actively looking to abuse people trying to play Tymna decks and play all these creature-based control decks, or creature decks in general. But just looking at a meta and figuring out ways to abuse whatever people are doing in it and bring them to the long game and grind them out, rather than just taking the generalist approach and trying to absolutely lock down every deck in the meta at all times.
Also, one other potential I could see that might unlock a control deck would be this would be kind of a unicorn, but a reasonably high color count planeswalker that's allowed to be your commander, that has some way of protecting itself, like, at all. So that you could you could play a card like Humility and, like, still have your commander work, and be able sometimes to actually play your commander and not just have it die.
So what you're saying is print Estrid, but good.
Ouch.
God, White Teferi would be disgusting. The only good Azorius deck. That's right, I said it. Don't at me. Actually, no, at me. Come to the Discord and at me. Argue me on this.
You mean that my incredible Eldrazi Displacer Rasputin Dreamweaver combo isn't competitive?
What do you mean I can't just play Tigum, Turn, Turbo Xerox, all of the blue-white combos to try to actually win the game?
I feel like that deck is actually not the worst.
Actually, Tigum, we missed Tigum. Tigum is a control deck.
Yeah, that's definitely a control deck.
Yeah.
But I think that deck isn't the worst, not because of the Xerox turns loop combos, but because uncounterable counterspells are really good.
Yep.
Yeah, they're alright.
I think Tigum actually gets a lot more value. Tigum is sort of an example of what I was talking about, where Tigum gets a lot more valuable as more and more people at the table are playing blue. Because you just stick them with dead counterspells in their hands, and all they can use the counterspells for are stopping everybody else, because you're always stopping their win attempts.
Yes.
So I think...
And
yes,
you should play Tigam to take advantage of people playing 4-color Rashmi to take advantage of all the Tymna decks.
Yes, always. I mean, no, what are you talking about? Shh.
So our
4-color Rashmi is unbeatable.
Our dream cEDH control Planeswalker commander is something like Elspeth Sun's Champion, but also blue. And black.
And black.
Because black is the best color in cEDH.
Just big Zur, but Planeswalker. And he can get 4+, so you can just always get Humility with him.
And it's a cast trigger, and
yeah,
players can't cast spells during your turn.
And he has an uptick that also adds more loyalty to himself, depending on how many creatures your opponents have.
But, like, sorry, the plus doesn't have to be something like Elspeth's. Like, it could even be something a little less impactful, but still passable, like Will Kenrith's plus, where you make two things
Lose
have
abilities.
0 power.
Yeah, I think like a
Well, or not even lose abilities, or like a double Jace Telepath Unbound.
I mean, I'm
just
definitely
like
down to turn
a
Timnaz
Jace style
off.
uptick.
Yeah.
I think a Jace style uptick on a blue-white planeswalker could actually be a really neat way of doing that, where like it's just like like uptick, everything gets -1 -0.
Well, yeah, I guess my inspiration was just like tokens play through humility pretty well.
That is true. Particularly lots of small tokens.
A whole lot of them.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we sort of missed this one, but I think it's actually really important to discuss because where a lot of people can go wrong when they try to play control in cEDH. But knowing when you decide to go for a win when you're playing control, and we sort of covered it a bit, like in the situation where you're going for the win. But I think we might want to delve into it a bit more because again, like I see a lot of people that are sort of new to the scene pick up a control deck and they either go for the win too early or they just continue tutoring answers until they're dead.
So I think the best way to evaluate when to win with a control deck is to essentially work backwards from the idea of you only try to win when no one can stop you. And obviously, 8 counter spells and ways to work around split second and all that, whatever. Obviously that'll give you a win. But what distinguishes a good control player versus a bad control player is understanding how their opponent's decks function and considering their states in the game.
Yeah, so like having an understanding of like how hard you actually do have the game locked down, and like what avenues you need to be denying people resources on.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think also another sort of when trying to lock the game down, another thing that a mistake that control players make is answering everything, which has 2 problems. The first is you run out of answers, and the second is your opponents don't. So make sure when you're playing your control deck and you want to work towards that win, to that state where you can combo safely and there's not really anything anyone can do about it, make sure that you don't answer things that other people at the table need to answer more.
I don't know what you're talking about, man. I just always slam the first thing in my hand down whenever anybody casts a spell. Arbor Elf delay. Get out of here. I don't want you making mana. Not on my turf.
I remember I played a game. I slammed like Rule of Law against a Storm deck, and then like immediately, I think it was a Yisan player just destroyed it. Like, what?
Dude, no. Okay, you're looking at this a level too shallowly. Okay, he was thinking on a level above where he knew he had to destroy it to get the interaction out of other people once the Storm player tried to go off, so that he was free to go.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Except for the fact that I tapped out the Rule of Law.
You shush. But yeah, like I think a lot of the time it's knowing when to combo is a lot about reading the board position and knowing when you no longer have to go for an answer. When either like the counterspell in your hand will do, and like when a lot of the time this happens when you get to a point in the game where nobody's actually fighting over anything anymore, and everybody has like 2 cards in hand, and a lot of people will be like, oh, like, or a lot of new people will be like, oh, like, that means that they might still have counter magic. But like a lot of the time, you'll get into that point in the game, and like nobody is actually answering anything anymore because nobody actually has counter magic. And that's sort of when you're free to just go for it, as long as you're holding something up. And I think, unless you guys have anything else to say about that, that might wrap up our control topic.
Given.
All right, let's move on to our next topic. I mean, just kidding. Gut check. If you could ban one card, what would it be?
Flash.
Crypt?
Flash.
Yeah, there we
Flash,
go.
Flash. Yeah, I think you're right.
Sick Robot, always on the winning team. Let's go.
I think, okay, let's just step back for a second. I think the one problem about gut check is that the person who knows the gut check question always has the advantage.
Well, yeah, like we can't.
I
have
mean,
it
last
not...
episode Noobzaurs said green, so I wouldn't
Wait, you said
necessarily
green?
assume that.
I wouldn't say he has an advantage when that's the kind of answer he's coming up with.
Yeah, I think we're good to move on.
Cool.
Competitive gameplay in general.
Just all of it. Get all of it.
In general.
Oh, nice one. I see what you did there.
All right. Stay tuned for next episode where we no longer have Spleen on here.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna try to cover a lot of the questions that we've been getting in general from a lot of people about cEDH social contract, the mindset that we go into cEDH with, and that people generally should expect from it, and a couple of other things too. So let's start with the cEDH social contract. Spleen.
All right, so the first thing I think of when I think of sort of the social contract or the expectations of cEDH is that everyone is always trying to win.
Yep.
I think if you try and lose or you try and make someone else win, that will very quickly get a lot of competitive players upset with you. So that includes things like strategic concessions or obvious king-making plays, or stuff like spiteful play, things like that.
Yep, 100%. I think the golden rule to go by in cEDH is always, as long as your chances of winning the game are above 0%, you should always be going for whatever percentages it is to win the game. You should always be making plays to maximize that.
Yeah.
Now,
I think a lot of
we aren't saying that you can't misplay, because misplaying is still you still believe in yourself making plays towards winning the game, but the intention has to be there, I think.
You have to be open to learning lessons.
Basically what Null's saying is it's okay to lose when I'm in the pod and give me those free points.
It's okay to concede to Nagila. It's fine.
I think that another thing that maybe wouldn't be okay in casual pods, but is sort of almost the opposite direction of what you might typically expect, is that if you do have an opportunity to increase your chances to win, you also are somewhat expected to take it, which can lead to awkward scenarios. For example, if you take your chances of winning from a 25 to a 30% chance, but there's a 70% chance that another player wins the game, in a casual pod, people might get upset with you for that. But in a competitive pod, that is the play you should make.
Yep. Like pretty much all the time, you should usually pretty much never be taking anybody else's chances of winning into account unless it directly affects your chances of winning the game. So like and it works both ways, where like, there's no reason for you to try to king make and increase somebody else's chances of winning, but there's also no reason to just screw over somebody and decrease their chance of winning without increasing your own, right?
Yes. And there's no, I guess to reiterate what I was trying to say, there's no reason to avoid drastically increasing someone's chances to win if it also increases yours.
That too, yes. The qualifier there is your win rate is king.
Yeah.
You should always
win rate specifically.
Yes. Specifically spleens. But But yeah, always be looking to increase your own chance of winning the game. You should always be looking to try as hard as you can to win. Which, I mean, it's sort of obvious from cEDH, just the name, but I think it's really something to keep in mind whenever you're playing the format. And it's also key from if you're, say, coming from a casual environment, and maybe working your way up in power level a bit more, and you sort of get thrown into cEDH. I think a lot of people can get sort of offended, or maybe not offended, but they can sort of have a bit of bad blood when somebody makes a play against them they see as a personal slight, when a lot of the time it's just other people increasing their own chance of winning the game. So it's always also important to keep in mind that other people are also trying to win the game as hard as they can.
And maybe I'm reiterating a bit, but I think I just want to make a distinction between playing to win and then also winning eagerly. I think a pretty common manifestation of winning eagerly is playing into a Remora when you don't have to, and then that turns into like some sort of king make situation.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I think that could also sort of be rolled into, like, sort of playing to win as well, though. But I definitely see what you're saying. Just because, like, playing to Remora might, like, yes, it's king making, but it's also probably not actually increasing your own chances of winning the game.
Yeah, that's exactly
a lot
what
of the
I mean.
time. Yeah.
You can definitely be in positions where playing into a Remora doesn't matter because you have adequate protection for 20 cards. Those are rare. The Gitrog could probably do it, but
yeah. Let's go over. I guess let's do some rule set stuff as well now, just to go over that, because I think we've gotten a couple questions on that too, and it's pretty good to have a general idea of like what kind of rules enforcement we're looking at when you go into a general cEDH game. Now, obviously, rules enforcement, same sort of thing as 1v1. It's going to vary from playgroup to playgroup. We don't exactly have a sanctioned scene, so it's not particularly a big deal of the rules enforcement level, but these are just things that you should generally be expected to be held to in a blind cEDH pod. Primarily, big one here is no house rules. For a large part of the cEDH community, just because house rules make everything messy, and I think a big goal of cEDH is try to make the play experience very consistent, make sure everybody's on the same page. As soon as you start introducing house rules, that sort of goes out the window.
With the one potential notable exception of house ruling out the priority pass land tapping ransoming
116.4.
Yeah.
Let's go. Yeah. I mean, there are. I feel like, house ruling more in the sense of like adding rules or, like removing big swaths of rules. Where. I'm not sure that I would include like minor rules fixes just to make the format actually function as, custom rules or house rules.
Yeah, sideboards, no infinite win conditions. Kind of those are pretty common suspects.
Yeah. Or extra or rolled back bans. No matter how much, so many cards on that ban list could be rolled back with no impact.
Let anyone play Leovold at my house.
Free Leovold. But, yeah. I mean, Leovold's in jail for tax evasion. He's got to do his time. I would let people play him, but deserves it. You gotta wait for him to get out of jail rightfully, lawfully.
Just so he can go. Just so we can go back.
Yeah.
Some other things to think about in terms of sort of a rule enforcement level is things like missed triggers, particularly May missed triggers. people will assume that you chose not to take an option, and you will not have the opportunity to go back. Sorry, people might let you go back, but you should expect that people will hold you to the mistakes, the triggers that you missed, and you should not try and pressure people or sort of, socially influence them away from doing that. The rules exist for a reason, and no one should be berated for trying to hold you to them.
Yeah.
In a competitive game.
Again, just reiterating. There's a lot of reiteration in this section, but I think it's because we all want to get stuff pretty clear. Just because
I think Noob is just the only one who's
important
actually
part.
Controversial.
But yeah, just we're not saying that you have to, if you have your own cEDH play group, you don't have to we're not saying you have to subscribe to all of these things and oh, you can't play cEDH if you do some of these things. Not at all. Just these are the things that you should expect going into a blind play group, and you shouldn't be you shouldn't expect anything different unless given ample reason by the play group itself, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the same stuff that goes for mistriggers go for the same thing as mistapping lands once a spell is already has already resolved, and you already have information, or taking back a play beyond a reasonable point in time once you've already paid for it, or spell's resolved, or you've passed priority on it already. Mostly things just expect that your playgroup's going to hold you to casting a spell. And I mean, that's usually a good thing, right? It makes you play tighter, makes you a better player once you get held to these kind of things.
It prepares you for the real deal.
Yeah, it does. Gotta grind those tourneys with entirely correct rules enforcement knowledge. I also think a big one, priority, right? Spleen, if you want to do priority.
Sure.
Big one.
I think particularly in casual EDH, there's a lot of looseness with priority, and also I think that it may not be always intentional, or they might not realize that what they're doing is sort of not the way the rules work. But people kind of angle shoot in casual pods, where somebody casts a spell, they're thinking about countering it, they take a little longer to think it, maybe think it through, maybe somebody else says something, and then it's like, oh, they're countering it, I don't have to. But in competitive EDH, you should expect that for, let's say, threatening cards, priority will be passed explicitly. And sometimes you do have to specify, that you think it's like, okay, let's go to properly and systematically using priority, because obviously doing that the whole time through a game is really clunky and awkward. But maybe not everyone says pass priority when you go turn one, fetch Llanowar Elves. But if you cast ad nauseum, you should expect that your opponents will all say pass priority before that ad nauseum resolves.
Yeah. I mean, shortcuts exist for a reason, right? In early game, we're we're all passing priority on your Llanowar Elves. I don't think anybody's going to go to the effort of misstepping that or doing
I'll misstep it. I'll do
on top of that. But yeah, expect that in the late game, you're not just going to be able to go, oh, ad nauseum resolve it, I'm going to start flipping cards immediately, or I'm going to cast flash resolve it, put Hulk in the graveyard, get it triggered. A lot of the time it's going to be, you cast a big spell, and then expect that people are going to go through the correct steps of priority.
And also remember that you don't get priority back once everyone passes priority on a spell.
You do
so
not.
You can't cast Yawgmoth's Will, pass priority, everyone passes, and then crack your LET.
Yeah.
People will hold you to doing that properly.
So I think there's definitely a class of house rules kind of just under time savers, and I think time savers are only really effective when players are compliant with them. And I'm not saying like you shouldn't question, an out of the blue time saver house rule, because you should. But what I'm saying is, if a player says, certainly either telegraphs or says explicitly that they want to be passing priority explicitly, that you should be not hesitate to enter that kind of mindset.
Yeah, just like, again, not saying that like you get like groups can't use time savers, shortcuts, all that stuff. Just expecting that, yeah, people are gonna take it pretty explicitly most of the time. Let's talk over, because I know a lot of people and outside of the competitive community sort of have misconceptions about this a bunch of the time, but politics in cEDH. I think a lot of people just don't believe that, or believe rather, that politics don't exist in cEDH, and it's all about super optimal play. Everybody's just doing their own thing. There's absolutely no room for actually like any amount of table talk. When I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think it just takes a different form, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I see in casual politics that frustrates me as someone with a slightly more competitive mindset is a hallmark of casual politics for me is essentially setting aside threat assessment. You say, okay, we're going to team up to do X, Y, or Z, and then that sort of translates into you now stop answering things that need to be answered because they come from the person that you're teaming up with. And if we go back to what we said about the social contract, where you're always trying to win, cEDH politics stops before it gets to that point. Right? You team up with someone to answer the card that you need answered, and then it's like, okay, and now we're both trying to win again. So we're moving on from there, and we're not on a team. We're just united by trying not to lose the game.
Honestly, I disagree, because I think like what your point fails to mention is that casual isn't necessarily about the unified goal of winning. Almost every player has possibly a different goal, and if you can politic with a player, it means you can both join together in pursuing one of your goals or both of your goals. So that some plays might not necessarily be obvious, but I think if you're playing to be casual as kind of, I'm saying that in kind of a weird way, but that's essentially saying playing to be competitive, but from the mindset of a casual player, you're always pursuing your goals, and like politics definitely can be a way to align those.
Yeah, I'd say the big difference is this is sort of a different topic, I guess. Well, still on politics. But I think probably the big difference is that casual politics is more about making deals and making explicit, just like talking about explicit things, or being like, yeah, we'll team up, and do like all of this stuff together, whereas competitive is a lot more situational. Like, I'm making a deal in this moment with you to do this specific thing, and the rest of it is a lot more bluffing rather than actual politicking. I think, a lot of cEDH politicking is more about playing around hidden information rather than playing around people's intentions or people's goals.
I think that's it's a fair way of characterizing it. I particularly like what you said about how the the alliances that form are more that they have a specific short-term purpose rather than a more general long-term purpose like they might in casual. It's like we're teaming up to answer that card, and then we're moving on.
Yeah.
Do we want to go into some other sort of maybe political things that aren't sort of explicit politicking or alliances?
Yeah, I think that we're going to have some questions about some tricky situations that come up when you sort of dive a bit more into the cEDH ideology, cEDH politics, rules, the social contract, rather. Null, you want to go over the basis of spite pacting?
the basis, okay. So I think
the basics.
Yeah, the basic how to spike pact 101.
Yeah.
Okay.
Step 1, don't.
Yeah, there you go. It's a really short set of rules. It's one rule, and yeah, it's don't. But so spite pacting is using losing the game with I guess losing the game without. Yeah, I guess losing the game while additionally not pursuing your goal of winning the game. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty fair. Because sort of the concept of spite pacting, where you're casting like a pact negation on somebody's thing without having the mana to actually pay for it your next turn,
or any reasonable expectation of producing the mana.
Yeah, can really be applied to a lot of situations other than that, where like you're making a play without actually like increasing your own win rate at all, or just doing something like spite. Like I've had some people just like cast a rolling earthquake and suicide with a rolling earthquake just to clear people's boards before they die, and stuff like that, where it's like, again, it just goes back to you shouldn't be making the plays that don't increase your own chances of winning, right? There's no reason to spite pact or pact of negation, slaughter pact somebody else's card when you are going to die from it, because it's not actually increasing your chances of winning. You're just doing it to do it and to mess with somebody else, and that is by definition not competitive.
One key caveat to casting pacts you can't pay for. What spike pacting is casting pacts that you expect to resolve that you don't expect to be able to pay for.
Yes.
Because if you have 2 counter spells and one of them's a pact that you can't pay for, you know what, maybe pacting the food chain if you think they have a counter spell is a good call. Like first. And then they counter your pact and then you have your second counter spell. So it's only a spite pact if you expect your pact to resolve and expect to be unable to pay for it.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, is like, yeah, pacting when you expect that you are going to have a trigger your next turn that you're not going to be able to pay for.
There's also kind of the reverse situation to a lesser extent, but where you have, for instance, 5 lands and you pact something, but one of your opponents has an untapped strip mine, and your expectation is they won't use it on you. I think that also counts as spite pacting.
I feel like that's definitely a bit more of a gray area. I think a situation like that gets into a lot more nuance about like situationally would they use the strip mine? What factors would contribute to them actually strip mining you to kill you, because it might not even be in their best interest to kill you. Or they might need the mana from the strip mine, or they might need to hold up the strip mine to remove a potential like tabernacle coming down or something like that. I think
if you genuinely expect them not to use the strip mine on you, it's not a spite pact. I mean, you're probably wrong, so you should expect that they would use the strip mine.
You're a bad player, but it's not a spite pact.
and both, I guess, like my point is, like in both situations, you're creating, you're allowing your opponents to remove you from the game. You know, which is against the idea of winning the game.
Yeah.
Okay, I have an interesting question about spite pacts, and politics.
Oh
It's a
boy.
bit of a scenario. You have a Pact of Negation in your hand, and 5 lands in play, 2 of which produce blue. But there's a Winter Orb. And however it is you know that one of your allies one of your
My allies,
opponents who
huh?
isn't
You've really
currently
politicked
threatening
well,
a
and
win.
now they're your ally.
Yeah.
Yes. One of your opponents who isn't currently threatening a win has a Nature's Claim in hand that could potentially destroy that Winter Orb. And they do not currently have the mana to play it, but they will before your turn. The first question is, is it a reasonable cEDH play to make the deal that they'll Nature's Claim the Winter Orb if you pact?
Yes.
I think there's a situation where it could be. Yeah, I think there is actually the situation I think there where you confirm with the player first before you cast the pact that they will Nature's Claim in return for you pacting the thing.
There's
Okay.
also
Because
okay.
I think
I want to make
Well-
a distinction before we continue. That's just these actions aren't necessarily happening in sequence without anything happening between them. So let's just say they'll eventually get their mana because between a player's turn, and then that player does something to the state of the game that requires them, for instance, to use their removal spell or feel that they need to keep the removal spell. I think that does not count as spite pacting.
Okay, so it's a reasonable deal. The next question is, you're the player with the Nature's Claim. Are you held to it? Or what changes it so you're not held to it? What changes the scenario?
I don't think you're inherently held to using the Nature's Claim. I personally don't believe that it's bad form, but I don't think there's anything that holds you to a verbal contract in a game of cEDH. I don't think you're necessarily so you're not necessarily held to using the Nature's Claim. What would happen is if you don't use the Nature's Claim, people no longer make deals with you.
It's a bad way of making friends, but it's a great way of winning games.
It's a great way of winning
that
games.
game.
Yeah.
It's a great way of winning that game. And this is specifically talking about the case where you want that person dead, because there might be a case where like you are using Nature's Claim for your own best interest because you want the packed person still in the game, which is a big one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also that sort of talking about winning game versus winning games. I think that's another thing that in cEDH happens much less than in casual,
Yeah.
is that each game is more standalone. It's less acceptable to make strategic decisions with the idea that it's going to impact how people play against you in a later game. You should be focused on winning the game you're in, and not on influencing people in later ones.
Yeah, like playing a bad card and showing it to people, and then immediately taking it out of your deck because like you forfeited one game just to have that thing to put in somebody's mind, right? Like there was no reason to play the bad card in the first place in that game as a standalone.
But even something like your behavior on a spell where you get to choose something, like you should be making the best decision in that game and not saying, oh, well, if I choose this decision, then next game, maybe when they cast a spell like that, they'll do something different next time. So, like, I don't know, with a card like Council's Judgment, saying, oh, I'll save their piece so that, next time it's cast, people will vote differently or whatever, is not really something you should be doing in competitive EDH. Not that people play Council's Judgment in competitive EDH.
But I think it's a good example. Yeah, I think I would agree with that.
Yeah, I definitely do as well.
All right, let's talk about game pace a bit. Just to round this out, because I think it's a good thing to talk about in context. You know, we're discussing the basics a bit of cEDH, and a bit of sort of entering into it. I think just expecting games to be, the tempo of games to be pretty quick, right? A lot of things happening early in the game. Not necessarily games ending early, but a lot of things happening.
Yeah, there's definitely not the land pass, ramp spell pass that you see in casual EDH.
Yeah. Again, another misconception, right? As always. As always, we're the misunderstood emo child of the Magic format family. But yeah, like, games don't always end on turn 3, but the point is, a lot of things happens by turn 3. you gotta be prepared for, stuff to go down. Always stuff to go down.
Yeah, it's not that games do end on turn 3, it's that they can. And so that means you have to be ready for someone trying to end the game starting on turn 2 or 3. And even if it doesn't happen, or even if they don't succeed, and the game winds up going long, the amount of time it takes to get into the, okay, real things are happening, and, I have to be ready for them, is much faster. The turns will take longer just because people are playing decks with lower average CMCs and can therefore play more spells.
Hey man, speak for yourself. I run my 3 CMC tribal beast
there's also,
deck.
I mean, 3 CMC is still low for casual.
No, 3 average CMC.
Still low for casual. But also, there's just a lot more important decisions that do need to be thought about. So that tends to slow people down a little bit. And there are a lot of cards that let people make choices, that like involve thought. So expect that turns will take longer.
In general, yeah.
But there will probably be fewer of them.
And I think that sort of wraps back around to playing the cEDH mindset, where like you should be prepared for games, right? Mentally, rather than just like going in blind. You should be like, yeah, like I know, like, sort of what should happen, and then I'm going to react to that accurately, rather than just like sort of taking it as it comes, like you would in a casual game, just being like, yep, just gonna make my land drops and play my ramp spells. You want to be actually doing things and responding to things. Being proactive.
Okay. Do we want to do some listener questions?
Some big old listener questions. We got a pretty big backlog.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got
yeah.
a few.
Let's do it. Where is our... Okay. No, do you want to take Timmy T1000s?
Which one?
Right there. That first one right there.
Okay. So Timmy T1000 says, here's one, so besides all the obvious best commanders on a given strategy, what are some of your favorite commanders to play, even though they may not be the best? A good example for me is I love Paradox Scepter Tasker, even though PST Thrasios is better.
I think you mean Paradox Scepter Thrasios.
Exactly.
Well, I know Spleen has a couple of these.
Harsh.
Harsh but accurate.
Is that harsh? I don't know. He enjoys the game.
I don't think I play Horse commanders of decks that are similar enough to be considered the same. But I always have a soft spot for the purest blue-black, like Storm Shell deck, even though it's just better either as like Kess, Zur, or Thrasios Tymna.
Yeah, it's the hard mode Storm.
Yeah,
everybody likes a good comeback story.
I'm definitely a fan of people who try and make like Serku work, or if they're brave enough and they try Drelnu, that's cool.
Get some JVP in there.
No.
No. No.
Always need plat.
No.
I definitely always have a soft spot for classic Control, even though we just spent a bunch of time ripping on it. But I definitely, yeah. And I also have a soft spot for like elves, but there's really no way to justify like an actual elves deck when you could just play better creature-based combo decks that don't rely, as much on your elves.
That's fair.
Are you suggesting that Guiltleaf Archdruid isn't the greatest card ever
I'm suggesting that it might be the greatest card ever printed,
people's land,
but it's not the greatest cEDH commander.
I mean, being the disgusting Hulk player that I am, and also having a deck that I build, always have a soft spot for Barals. I haven't played a bunch recently, but there's something about hulking on hard mode without flash. Just tickles me pink sometimes.
If flash is banned, is Viral's back?
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, boy.
Get in there. All I need is like 5 more Entombs printed, and we're good to go. We'll get there.
I have a soft spot for people who play Shuffle Hulk, even though Breakfast is clearly a superior deck.
Oh, God. God damn. I don't even come back from that one. I don't think I do. See you guys. I'm done here. Bye.
We'll leave that for next episode.
Left. Christ. All right. Let's do Meep-o-matics. Meep-zero-matics. Meep-o-matics. What do you think about revealing hidden information you have access to, like in your hand or the top of your library when you're topping? Sensei's Divining topping, I'm assuming, to assure your opponents that you are not a threat.
So, sorry, first thing I want to specify, I am not a judge, but my reading of the rules, I don't think you can actually reveal the cards with Sensei's Divining top.
Yeah, I believe you are not allowed to reveal cards from your library.
Like, you are allowed to just turn a card that's in your hand around and show it to people, but you may not be allowed to do that with top, so be careful.
Word of caution, take this with a grain of salt. But say you want to reveal a card in your hand. Would you guys ever consider doing that in a real game?
I probably would, yeah. But I kind of want to say that that's like a last resort situation. I feel like if you feel like you're always tending towards that being your way of revealing information, then you're not being creative enough.
Yeah, I think this is, like, I don't see anything, like, wrong philosophy-wise about this. Like, I don't think there's anything uncompetitive about revealing your hand that way. But I think you're severely limiting yourself, and you're not considering other options. I think...
Yeah, last resort.
People super underestimate the power of hidden information a lot of the time, where, like, a lot of the time, if you talk enough and are convincing enough, you can get the same effect by just telling people that you're not a threat and telling people that you don't have anything and making it evident in your plays that you look like not a threat rather than
not everyone is as charming as you.
Oh.
Wow. Does that make up for that shuffle hope?
Yeah, but like that's a big part of, like, well, even, yeah, actually, especially playing Shuffle, that's actually a big part of it, is like just sort of politicking your way into and making a display of it through your actions rather than, like, actually giving people information. Saying, like, yeah, I'm tapping out and playing things that aren't win cons, and I'm showing you guys actively that I'm not actually a threat. And then you flash lock them the next turn, but that's another story.
The one other hidden information question that I think is probably the most relevant or the most likely. Probe.
Do you probe yourself? Good question.
No, that's not what
you gotta reveal your hand to yourself.
Probe does not reveal.
Probe hands. Does not.
Probe lets you look.
Yes, you look.
So what is? Do you guys have any etiquette or strategy around revealing to your mutual opponents
I think it's the same.
what you have seen off
I think
your
it's the
phone.
same concept as this. I think there's nothing like BM. There's nothing like inherently bad about just revealing their hand to everybody else at the table. But I think by doing so, you're doing yourself a disservice, because by being the person that gets to look at a hand, you have a lot of leverage now, because the person that you probed isn't going to willingly reveal their own hand most of the time. So you have this insanely good position now where you have knowledge of hidden information that other people don't, and you get to mess around with revealing maybe correct, maybe incorrect information to influence how other people play, rather than
One
just
other
giving
thing,
it.
yeah, one other thing I'd want to say about revealing information is make sure you time it correctly. Because, for example, here's a scenario that I've seen before. You look at someone's hand, and let's say they're on food chain, and you see food chain, force of will, pact of negation, and another blue card. That's obviously a terrifying hand. If you tell your mutual opponents about the double counterspell backup when the food chain is on the stack, it's already too late.
No, wait,
And I've seen it's like, oh, that won't work because that player has 2 interaction spells. It's like, oh, well, if you had told me about that earlier, I could have done something about that.
Maybe I wouldn't have tapped out in the face of that.
So just make sure when you have hidden information that you reveal it when it will make your opponents make choices that you want them to make, as opposed to when it's already too late and they've made their choices.
Yeah. Spleen, you want to do Jadoff Commander's second question there?
JD of Commander.
JD of Commander? Jadoff Commander?
Sure.
Jdov.
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 It's now
J-Dog.
Jdov Commander. Alright, so the question is, regarding deck building, how do you seek to balance playing general hate pieces versus gas? And how do you find the balance? And when do you add more of one or the other?
Personally, I think this is very deck dependent. It's hard for me to give a general answer to this question when every deck is going to require a different amount of gas and a different number of hate pieces depending on how long you're looking at going into the game, how efficient your combo is going to affect how much gas you want to play usually. How much gas is in your command zone. If you don't have a value generating commander in your command zone, you're going to need a lot more main deck gas pieces rather than just being able to play Thrasios Tymna.
I just want to make a quick distinction between Rest in Peace and Curse Totem. Rest in Peace is a combo piece. Curse Totem is not a combo piece.
Oh god.
Wow.
Here we go.
Rest in Peace is not always
It is not always a combo piece.
No, you can continue jamming Rip Helm in a corner somewhere, preferably far, far away from me.
Oh, I will.
And then we the adults will handle this question.
The other thing, I guess this isn't necessarily gas, it's more about the balance of interaction versus hate pieces, is that there's a lot of value in having enough interaction that people assume you have something, even if you don't.
That
so,
is true.
If you go down to like 3 interactive spells, it becomes really hard to bluff having one. So maybe try and maintain a critical mass of interaction. Like if you have 10 interactive spells and your opponents have seen 1 out of you and you have 3 cards in hand, it's like, maybe they have a removal or counterspell. So there's value in being able to bluff, so you don't want to jam so much upfront hate that everyone assumes you never have anything. But again, it's obviously very deck dependent. But that's just sort of something to think about when you're putting your deck together.
Yeah. Null, do you have any specific insights about this? Because I know, like, this is actually a pretty big thing in Teferi, right? Where, like, Teferi has access to, like, those, like, 10 slots that you sort of have to fill with whatever you can find. So, like, what's the reasoning on filling them with extra hate versus more gas?
It's certainly meta dependent. I think it's kind of hard to speak to, like, the cEDH ecosystem meta. Like, if that's like a fair comment.
The meta at large.
Yeah, the meta at large. Yeah. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Do we have any more? Oh. Let's do one more. Sorry. We're gonna clear the backlog a bit. Get these out of the way. Timmy T1000, as always, more questions. With the tax return season quickly approaching in US, let's say he's got approximately X amount of money. He's saying 1,000. We'll just say whatever. Excess money.
Timmy T, 1,000 US dollars.
There you go. Timmy T money.
So that's like 5,000 Canadian.
Canadian pesos. God. Say he wants to get into cEDH with $1,000, but he doesn't own any of the non-land cards. But he has a proxy deck of. What are the first cards that you purchase to begin building a cEDH collection? And with the cards that he's buying, fitting as many roles in as many decks as possible. Well, I think for sure you start with the Mana Rocks.
Yeah, definitely do. The non-colored Mana Rocks.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe on $1,000 you could make a case for skipping Mox Diamond, because it would represent such a large portion of it, and you could potentially get like 4 or 5, $50-ish cards that would do more for your deck than a single Mox Diamond, or your decks plural.
Yeah.
Than a single Mox Diamond. But certainly Crypt goes in every deck and is possibly the most powerful card in a vacuum in the format.
That's so good.
Mana Vault goes in a lot of decks and is not too expensive. Chrome Mox, same thing.
Soul Ring,
those would be a good place to start.
Yeah.
Yes, Soul Ring's cheap.
Yeah.
The next thing would probably be tutors.
Yeah,
because there are a lot of them. Like, you can get a lot of good tutors for not too much money. There's lots in the sort of $50 range. Maybe you skip out on the Imperial Seal again. But they go in every deck that can run them, which is almost every deck, because black is the best color in cEDH. And
cough. Continue.
What? They just make every deck better. So Vampiric and Demonic would be the first ones, and then lots of decks can take advantage of Entomb. Not all, obviously, but if you want to play one of those decks, that's a good one to have. Then I'd probably move on to some interaction spells.
Well, I think you'd Diabolic Intent too, just as a tack on to that.
Oh yes, Diabolic Intent.
As always.
I play Kess, so that's maybe no Diabolic Intent.
Yeah, I think generally just bug staples first, because you can pretty much build whatever you want with those. But yeah, I think the big three aside from Mana Rocks are probably green staples, including Dorks, because they're all cheap, and the ones that aren't are still fairly cheap. So like even Noble Hierarch is fairly doable on a $1,000 budget. And then interaction too. So just like picking up stuff that isn't like what Force of Will and like Mana Drain, but those are both like getting a bit cheaper. So I think like all the good blue interaction spells that aren't Force of Will.
I'd maybe make an exception for the like.
Force of Will and Mana Drain.
Sorry, pardon. I'd maybe make an exception for like the reserved list cards that haven't spiked that are kind of cheap. Yeah.
Just use that $1,000 for investments. Yeah, let's go.
And I know the question specified non-land, but not everyone has the proper land base. I would say you should absolutely have fetches and shocks.
Oh yeah, before any of this, like before you even get to rocks, you should probably be on
Yes.
fetcher stocks if you don't have the lands already. That's pretty much priority number one.
Maybe you can skip out one fetch if it's like if you really don't want to buy the Scalding Tarn and your deck is not red. Maybe you can get away with that, but you should.
Thought you meant Arid Mesa. Yeah, get that out of here.
No, but like if you're really trying to save on budget,
yeah,
maybe cutting like one or two expensive off-color fetches. But if you're playing, let's say, a 3-color deck, you definitely want all of your on-color fetches and probably
as many off-colors.
At least 5.
Yeah.
Hopefully the full 7, but
I guess yeah. It depends if you're trying to build multiple decks or just if it is as many decks as possible. Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, I think that covers most of it.
I just want to answer one quick listener question.
Go for it.
Hurricane219 asks, can one of the special episodes be on Breakfast Hulk? And the answer is yes. One of them can be.
Can be. Might be. Will be. We'll see. As a reminder, you guys, we're still working out special episodes. Look forward to those in the future. As always, they require a bit more production value, a bit of cat wrangling to go on to get them pushed through, get the good guests on. But rest assured, we are trying to make it happen. There will be some to come. So keep your eye out for that. And I think that gets us on to the end of our show. Thanks for sticking with us, guys. I think it was a pretty good podcast. Glad that you listened in. As always, check out Discord. Discord's always a great place to be. We'll put that in the link above on Podbean. The description's above, right? Yeah. We'll put it above the player on Podbean. Our email, into the north.
I'll put it below on YouTube.
There you go. Into the North Podcast. I'm bad at this.
Our email address is intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com.
There you go.
If you want to give us feedback, you can do it there, or obviously on Discord, or wherever else you find us. I guess you can continue.
Yeah. Obviously, check out cEDH subreddit and Discord as always. Discord.gg/cEDH. I'm on there. These guys are on there. Maybe Null isn't on there, but we're mostly on there. I try when I can. Check out PlayEDH. We're mostly on there too to hang out there. Great communities. We will have an episode in the next month. We're getting on deadlines now. Don't worry about it. We're making it happen. And as always, give us things that you want to see us cover. We're always looking for more suggestions, what you guys want to see. Let us know what you want for special episodes. Let us know what you want for regular episodes. Come drop in for listener questions. Go fill out gut check. Straw polls, all that good stuff. Yeah. See you guys later, next episode.
A good one.